The day started like any other in the sleepy town, quiet, uneventful, and wrapped in a blanket of routine. But that was all about to change. Inside a roadside diner known for its homemade pies and endless coffee refills, life bustled on. Conversations flowed, forks clinked against plates, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. The warm glow of sunlight filtered in through the windows, bathing everything in a peaceful light. And then they walked in. The heavy rumble of motorcycles, moments earlier, had hinted at their arrival, but no one expected the energy shift that would follow. A group of 6 leather-clad bikers swaggered into the diner, their presence casting a long shadow over the cheery ambiance. Tattoos peeked out from beneath sleeves, boots thudded heavily against the wooden floor, and their leader, a towering man with a cruel grin, surveyed the room like a predator eyeing prey. At a table near the window sat a woman in a wheelchair. Her hair was tied back in a neat braid, and a serene expression rested on her face as she quietly sipped her coffee. Alone and seemingly vulnerable, she didn't spare the bikers a glance. It was as if their presence didn't matter, as if she had seen far worse. The leader nudged one of his men, whispering something that drew a round of chuckles from the group. With a nod, they approached her table. "Hey there, sweetheart," the leader said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "All alone today? Need some company?" The woman didn't look up. She simply stirred her coffee, the soft clink of the spoon against the cup the only sound in the room. "Too good to talk to us, huh?" Another biker sneered. "Or maybe you're just shy." Still no response. The tension grew thicker, like an impending storm. Other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between the bikers and the woman. The waitress behind. The counter gripped the edge tightly, debating whether to intervene. "Look, lady," the leader said, leaning closer, his grin widening into something more sinister. "We're just trying to be friendly. Don't be rude now." Finally, the woman set down her spoon with deliberate calm. She raised her eyes to meet his, and what he saw made his grin falter. There was no fear in her gaze, only an unnerving stillness, like the calm before a deadly storm. "Walk away," she said, her voice steady and composed. The leader blinked, momentarily thrown off. This wasn't the reaction he was expecting. Most people quivered under their intimidation. But not her. "Or what?" he challenged, trying to regain control of the situation. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn military tag, placing it on the table with a quiet but unmistakable clink. The leader glanced down, confusion turning to curiosity. Before he could process it, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You really don't want to find out," someone said from behind. The bikers turned to see an older man standing near the entrance. He was rugged with a quiet intensity that commanded attention. His stance was relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, something dangerous. "And who the hell are you?" the leader snapped. "Just someone who knows exactly who she is," the man replied coolly. "And if you had any sense, you'd leave her alone." The tension reached its breaking point. The leader hesitated, weighing his options. The woman's calm demeanor, the stranger's confidence, something about this situation didn't feel right. Still, pride demanded he not back down completely. "Let's go," he finally growled to his crew. "We'll be back." As the bikers filed out, the older man walked over to the woman's table. He picked up the military tag, examining it briefly before handing it back. "Delta Force?" he asked quietly. The woman gave a faint nod. "Retired." "Thought so," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Mind if I sit?" "Be my guest," she replied. Outside, the bikers mounted their motorcycles, their minds already racing with plans for retaliation. They had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Inside, the woman took a sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. Whatever was coming, she was ready. Her story wasn't one of grandeur and fame, but of quiet resilience and unyielding strength. Born and raised in a modest town, Sarah Miller had always been different. While others dreamed of simple lives, she yearned for something greater, to serve, to protect, to stand for something beyond herself. That desire led her straight into the heart of the U.S. military. In her early 20s, Sarah enlisted, determined to prove that she could keep up with the best of them. And she did more than that. She excelled. Her superiors quickly noticed her unwavering focus and fierce determination. Over the years, she became one of the few women to make it into the elite Delta Force unit, a feat that required not only physical prowess but mental fortitude few could match. Her missions were grueling, each one more dangerous than the last. She operated in the shadows, taking on roles that few ever heard about. But those years left their mark, both physically and emotionally. A roadside ambush during her final mission changed everything. Though she survived, severe spinal injuries left her wheelchair-bound. Returning to civilian life was an uphill battle. The transition from being an elite operative to navigating life in a wheelchair was jarring. But Sarah wasn't one to wallow. Self-pity. She adapted, just as she always had. She found solace in simple routines, morning coffee at the diner, reading books, and staying connected with old comrades who respected her beyond words. Her reputation, however, was something she never flaunted. To the townsfolk, she was just Sarah, the quiet woman who loved her coffee and kept to herself. Few knew of her past, and she preferred it that way. But those who did know held a deep respect for her, often watching over her from afar without her ever realizing it. The bikers didn't stay away for long. True to their word, they returned later that evening, their roaring engines announcing their arrival long before they stepped through the diner's doors. This time, they weren't here to talk. The leader strode in first, his eyes scanning the diner until they landed on Sarah. She was in her usual spot by the window, her book open in front of her. But this time she wasn't alone. The older man from earlier sat across from her, his expression calm but alert. "Didn't think we'd forget about you, did you?" The leader sneered, motioning for his crew to spread out. The older man leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Still, time to walk away," he said, his voice steady. "No need to make a scene." "Oh, there's gonna be a scene, all right," the leader shot back. "You think you can humiliate us and get away with it?" One of the bikers grabbed a chair and dragged it noisily across the floor, sitting down with an air of menace. "We don't take kindly to being shown up," he added, cracking his knuckles for effect. Sarah closed her book with a soft thud, placing it neatly on the table. She exchanged a glance with the older man, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. "We gave you a chance," Sarah said quietly. "You should have taken it." Her words, though soft, carried a weight that made the leader hesitate for a split second. But pride and ego were powerful motivators. He wasn't about to back down in front of his crew. "Big talk for someone in a wheelchair," he sneered, taking a step closer. The atmosphere grew charged, every diner patron holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. But before the leader could say another word, the diner door opened again, this time revealing two more figures. Both men were rugged, their military bearing unmistakable. They didn't say a word as they walked in, taking positions near Sarah and the older man. The message was clear. She wasn't alone. The leader's bravado faltered as he took in the newcomers. This wasn't the simple intimidation game he had planned. He was outnumbered and outmatched. "You really want to do this?" one of the newcomers asked, his tone casual but laced with warning. For a moment, it seemed like the bikers might actually reconsider, but pride was a dangerous thing. "Let's go," the leader growled reluctantly, motioning for his crew to leave. "This ain't over." As the bikers filed out, the tension in the diner slowly eased. Patrons exhaled in relief, and the waitress behind the counter finally relaxed her grip on the coffee pot. Sarah watched them leave, her expression unreadable. Whatever was coming next, she knew she had allies by her side, and she was ready for whatever storm lay ahead. Outside the diner, the leader of the bikers, furious and humiliated, pulled out his phone and made a call. "Get everyone here," he growled into the phone. "We've got a situation." Back inside, Sarah glanced at her watch. She had expected this. Quietly, she reached for her own phone and sent a quick text to an old friend. The text was simple but carried weight. "It's happening." Minutes later, the roar of more motorcycles echoed in the distance. The bikers weren't bluffing. They had called reinforcements. A larger, rougher group of outlaws who thrived on chaos. The older man at Sarah's table stood up, his eyes narrowing as he listened to the approaching engines. "Looks like they brought friends." "So did we," Sarah replied calmly. As if on cue, a convoy of vehicles pulled up near the diner. These weren't ordinary cars. They were military-grade SUVs driven by Sarah's old comrades, veterans who owed her their lives. One by one, they stepped out, each carrying the unmistakable air of trained professionals. The leader of the bikers stepped forward, momentarily taken aback by the sight of the well-organized team. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You think this scares us?" One of the veterans, a towering man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "We're not here to fight," he said evenly. "But if you want trouble, we're more than ready." The tension was palpable. The bikers, realizing they were outmatched in both numbers and skill, exchanged uneasy glances. Their bravado was fading fast. Seeing the hesitation in the bikers, Sarah wheeled herself forward, her calm gaze fixed on the leader. "This isn't about pride or proving who's tougher," she said firmly. "It's about knowing when to walk away. You came here thinking you could intimidate us. You were wrong." The leader clenched his fists, his pride battling with common sense. But before he could respond, one of his own crew muttered, "Let's just go, man. This ain't worth it." Reluctantly, the leader nodded. "Fine. We're done here." As the bikers began to disperse, Sarah turned to the gathered veterans. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I knew I could count on you." One of them smiled. "Always, Sarah. You've done more for us than we could ever repay." With the immediate threat gone, the tension finally eased. The diner's patrons began to relax, and the waitress brought over a fresh pot of coffee, offering Sarah a grateful smile. "That was impressive," the older man said, sitting back down. "You didn't even need to raise your voice." "Sometimes, the strongest moves are the ones you don't make," Sarah replied with a faint smile. Outside, the bikers rode off into the distance, their pride bruised but their lesson learned. They wouldn't be returning. Inside, the diner returned to normal. But for those who had witnessed the events, it was a day they wouldn't soon forget. A day when quiet strength triumphed over loud bravado. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the diner, the tension of the day finally melted away. The patrons, now calm, resumed their meals, though whispers of what had just transpired continued to circulate. Sarah wheeled herself toward the door, followed closely by the older man. Outside, her old comrades leaned against their vehicles, exchanging light-hearted banter as if nothing unusual had happened. "You didn't have to come all this way," Sarah said, her tone soft but appreciative. "You'd have done the same for us," one of the veterans replied with a grin. "Besides, it was worth it just to see their faces when we showed up." The group shared a quiet laugh, a moment of levity after the day's tension. But beneath the humor lay a deep bond, one forged through shared experiences and mutual respect. "You've always had a way of keeping things calm," the older man said, turning to Sarah. "Even back then, you knew when to act and when to wait." Sarah smiled faintly, the memories of her past missions flickering in her mind. "Sometimes, battles are won not by who strikes first, but by who stands their ground the longest." The older man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Wise words. You've taught us more than you realize." As the veterans began to disperse, heading back to their lives, one of them approached Sarah with a small token, a patch bearing the emblem of their unit. "For old time's sake," he said, pressing it into her hand. Sarah looked down at the patch, her fingers tracing its familiar design. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll keep it close." With a final round of goodbyes, the veterans climbed into their vehicles and drove off, the rumble of their engines fading into the distance. The older man turned to Sarah. "Need a ride home?" "No," she replied, glancing at her wheelchair. "I think I'll take the long way. Gives me time to think." He smiled, understanding her need for solitude. "All right, take care of yourself, Sarah." As he walked away, Sarah sat in her wheelchair, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The events of the day had reminded her of something important, that strength isn't always about physical ability. It's about resilience, courage, and knowing when to stand up for what's right. She took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to live life on her terms. And if trouble ever came her way again, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. With that thought, she turned her wheelchair toward the road, the fading light guiding her path forward. She wasn't just a retired soldier or a woman in a wheelchair. She was a symbol of quiet strength, ready for whatever lay ahead.